All right, joining me once again here on the Matthew Filipowicz Show is Mariame Kaba. Mariame is a Chicago-based organizer, an educator, a writer. She is the founder and director of Project NIA, a group working to end youth incarceration. She's the writer of the blog Prison Culture, which you can find at usprisonculture.com. You can also find her on Twitter at Prison Culture. Mariame, thank you so much for being on the show again.
Thank you so much, Matthew.
All right, so Mariame, let's actually start out with a project that you have coming up in June, I believe is when it actually becomes available to people. It's a project that you've done with a lot of different writers and artists. It's a limited edition book that's coming out that's called No Selves to Defend, A Legacy of Criminalizing Women of Color for Self-Defense. And frankly, the art you've already posted the artwork that goes along with the essays that are going to be in this book. Just tell us about the book, what it's about, and how it came together.
Sure. So the book is basically an attempt to place Marissa Alexander's case in historical context. For those who don't know, Marissa is a mother of three who is right now basically fighting for her life. She was incarcerated for several years, having been convicted of a 20-year mandatory minimum for firing a warning shot to ward off her estranged, abusive husband. So she's going to be retried in July, at the end of July on the 28th, and this will be happening in Florida. And so one of the things that I wanted to do, I'm part of the Chicago Alliance to Free Marissa Alexander, and also connected to Free Marissa Now, which is the national mobilization on her case. And so what we wanted to do was to try to show that Marissa's case is not singular, right? That her case is actually part of a long legacy where women of color have not been able to appeal for self-defense, that they have really no selves to defend. And so this, project basically came together very quickly. We pulled it together in 6 weeks. And our idea was to show other kinds of cases of other women of color over the many, many years as to how they also were criminalized for using self-defense. And so that's kind of the gist of the origin of this project. And as you mentioned, it's a project that we worked with a lot of people on to actually make happen in a very short time frame. And so we've got essays from Michael Denzel Smith, who writes for The Nation. I've written something for this piece. Also had Lewis Wallace, who's a writer and a person on radio. We've gotten a whole bunch of other folks who've been writing, who wrote different pieces for different folks. Andy Smith, who's an organizer, activist, scholar. And then we also got amazing original art that was created by various artists, including Molly Crabapple and Micah Bazant, and many more. So it's really going to be a limited edition of 150 copies that we're printing, that we will sell, and that all the proceeds will go to Marissa's legal defense.
You also have Victoria Law, who's been on our show a bunch of times and stuff like that, who's a really, really great writer and activist. It's just like honestly, I'm scrolling through the post you have for it without even talking about the writing that's going to be in the essays and the history that comes in this. The artwork alone, I think, will make this book worth doing. And not only that you should be donating to this cause anyway, because it's a very, very just cause and a very, very important cause. But the artwork is just like the ones you have for each of the individual people who are historically involved in this is just, again, just like really, really phenomenal stuff.
Oh, great. I appreciate that. Some of the people that are featured in the booklet are Joan Little, for those who may know the Free Joan Little campaign from the 1970s, which actually Angela Davis, that was one of the first prisoner defense campaigns that she got involved in right after her trial. When she won her trial in 72, she then supported in 74 and 75 Joan Little's attempt to actually win her freedom after she killed a prison guard who had raped her in her prison cell. And so Joan Little's part of that. Inez Garcia is featured in this. And then there are people that people may not know. Bernadette Powell, Cassandra Peaton, some names of folks that are less famous than Joan Little and Inez Garcia are.
Yeah, you have C.C. McDonald as well. A lot of people might know, people in the progressive circle might know her name, obviously, too. So, yeah, it really is. It looks phenomenal. Do you actually, let's talk a little bit about kind of the overall part of the book. Just kind of give a little bit of perspective, because, again, this is not something that just started in 2014 or 2013. This is something that's been around for quite some time. Talk a little bit on the historical aspect of how this is something that's been, kind of ingrained in our history.
Yeah. So actually, I was thinking the other day, I wish that there's a young woman named Celia. They call just her Celia a slave. And she was basically put to death for killing her master, who had been basically repeatedly sexually assaulting her over a long period of time. And Celia, the story of Celia as slave is actually something that a lot of people don't know about, but she was put to death in 1855, and her trial, actually, the trial that she faced, it was really something that kind of was seminal, because it established basically that slaves, and particularly black slave women, were really property. And she really didn't get a chance she tried her lawyers, which is really interesting. This is happening in 1855, remember. Her lawyers are arguing to the court that she actually has a right to self-defense, that she is a person and is allowed to do that. And they end up finding, actually, during the trial, that she actually has no right to self-defense. And so this kind of sets the stage for, at least on the criminal legal side, black women in particular, never really having a right to self-defense, never having self to defend, being seen as property. And so she, again, clubs her master to death, and she had tried various routes to get him to stop assaulting her. And she had no luck. She even turned to his daughters to intervene, and that never went anywhere. And so when he went to try to attack her again, she basically then clubbed him to death. But she also had children with him. So she'd given birth to 2 of his children and was pregnant with a third. But needless to say, they did end up hanging her for what she basically said was self-defense. So this is a story that has roots of a long time, that you can't protect your body, you don't have bodily integrity, you can't fight back. And so this is really, this is just kind of that story. I wish I had been able to include in the booklet, but there was no photo of her, so we have no image of her. So we couldn't do a portrait of her. So we basically started with, we have a portrait of a woman who was the only woman ever put to death in the electric chair in Georgia. Her name was Lena Baker. And this is in the 1940s. And so she's the earliest account that's in the book of also a woman who was basically, she was hired by a man who was convalescing, and then he ended up sexually assaulting her repeatedly, locking her in his barn, doing all sorts of really horrifying things to her. She also then shoots him and kills him as he's trying to assault her again, and she ends up being convicted of his murder, and she ends up actually being murdered by the state in the electric chair. She's the only woman in Georgia's history to have been killed in the electric chair. And then 60 years later, she gets a pardon because the state of Georgia realizes, obviously, that she was actually defending herself.
I guess that's nice for her descendants, but it certainly didn't help her at the time. I guess
really did not.
Yeah.
No, it really did not. It's a horrifying story, but it's a story that you can see that plays itself out over and over again over time. Story of another woman who actually ends up in a position where she, in 1913, in Texas, also defends herself. Her name is Mary Wilson. She's charged with murder after she kills a state trooper whose name is Olaf Olson, and she's held without bail. They say she confessed, but she basically said the soldier threatened her, and she tried to flee to her friend's home. He grabs her. She got scared. She thought he was going to, quote unquote, do her bodily injury. She draws her revolver and shoots him. Again, it's self-defense. She ends up paying for that with her life. So, this is something that is not new in terms of people, Black women or women of color, trying to protect themselves. Frankly, a lot of women in general. White women have also been caught up in the system around who are survivors of domestic violence who've been not allowed to invoke self-defense as well. In many cases, it's happened more disproportionately with women of color, but white women also who are survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence also find themselves criminalized within this larger system. So it's a bigger story, right, than just one person's case at one moment in historical time that we're in now. It's a long and a story that has a long progeny.